Welcome one, welcome all. It is Tuesday, the final one of the month of September, September 26, 2023, 8:01 p.m. Central Standard Time, which means we are late. We are Blogging the Boys. This is the weekly Blogging the Boys Roundtable, which you can watch in any number of places. You can watch it on the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel, the Blogging the Boys Twitch channel, or the Blogging the Boys Facebook page. You can obviously watch it live. You can catch the rewatch at your own convenience. You can also listen to the show in an audio fashion on the Blogging the Boys podcast network, where you get access to all sorts of shows. In fact, all throughout the week, you can hear two different shows every single weekday, one on Saturday, and of course, our live post-game show, which we stream to all these platforms as well. The Blogging the Boys universe is a very busy place. My name is RJ Ochoa. You can see, hear, watch, and read me all throughout it, just like you can the fine gentlemen who are with me tonight. We will go in clockwise order, and I have decided to tell the loyal audience, the wonderful audience, a fun fact about each of them. We start with Tony Catalina. Tony, who has taken so long to watch The Office that there is now going to be a reboot of it. So, Tony, I blame you for this unfortunate circumstance that has plagued us all.
So I'll end up watching the reboot, I guess, right? Like,
if you watch the reboot and not the actual one, I don't even know that I can convey the level of disappointment. But nevertheless, I'm not going to express what we're doing quite yet, but Tony was the feistiest in terms of the information that our roundtablers had to provide. David Howman was the kindest, I would suppose. He is sitting in the conference room, if you are watching, from the aforementioned Dunder Mifflin. The fun fact about him is that he's probably had more than enough pumpkin than he can count, and we're still a week away from October. So Howman, chill out, dude. Like, it will still be there. Like, it's okay.
You know, there's no such thing as enough pumpkin, but I do try to kind of take it in stride, everything in moderation.
I don't think that that's true based on your Instagram stories at the very least. Next up, it is Brandon Clements, the reigning roundtable champion. That is a good point to know. Not the fun facts that I will tell you all. My fun fact for Brandon is that he is a fan of Syracuse, in case anybody did not know this. Is this true, Brandon?
Wait, what?
Yeah, that's...
Since when?
You know me. I always bring in the fun facts to Syracuse. Actually, a fun fact about the Cuse, their red zone percentage for defense is number 1 in the country. Just thought you guys might want to know that.
See, why don't they call it the orange zone? Why is it called the red zone? Like, it's a color that's so close to orange, you would think that there would be some sort of delineation there between the two.
I'm curious myself, but there are some local television programs that have the orange zone kind of thing in it. So it is something in our local television network.
Congratulations. Okay, well, fun facts about each and every one of you. Tony's was the worst because Tony, The Office ended 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, and you haven't watched it.
I haven't either, Tony, so it's okay, bud.
Brandon, if you want to go back to back, you should shut up right now. All right, that's all I'll say. Let's just be cool. So we've got some points that we're not going to hand out, but David did take 1 point away from Tony for never watching The Office. So again, Brandon, pay attention. Kevin took 5 points away from you, Howman, for the pumpkin. Again, if we're in the month of October, it's one level of tolerating, but like not now. In the Flats has offered 3 points to Tony for being feisty. Deserved after that performance. I think talking about the Cowboys, of course. We are here to commiserate the Dallas Cowboys falling 28-16 to the Arizona Cardinals. It's only Tuesday evening, but Howman, I think it's already been a long week on the internet. It has been a very insufferable week if you are a member of Cowboys Twitter, which everybody here obviously is.
Yeah, you know, honestly, my fiance is a Bears fan, so that's helped me keep things in perspective. So through her, I know that as bad as this week has already been for Cowboys fans, it could be a whole lot worse. That doesn't mean, though, that it's not, you know, it's not been a great week so far. Having to watch that game and then having to write about it, analyze it, talk about it afterwards. And it was just kind of like the perfect coalescence of all the things that could have gone wrong. Like the red zone was a problem again. The defense got lit up by Josh Dobbs. And then, of course, top it all off with Dak Prescott throwing his first pick of the year. You knew it was going to come at some point, but to come at the end of a game against the Cardinals in the end zone like that, it was just kind of the cherry on top of a horrible, horrible day for the Cowboys.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Rick says, hi, RJ, Tony, Dave, and Brandon. The rare Dave for Howman goes by Howman around these parts. So interesting. Dave in our world is Blogging the Boys founder, Dave Halpern. Either way,
here, man.
That's right. I begged Dave to come on these and he won't. So if you guys pressure him, maybe he finally will. Tony, the pressure has been high around Dak Prescott. And again, I don't want to give away your information here tonight, but It took one moment. I mean, it is a slippery slope that the Dallas Cowboys walk. That one moment of mortality to be shown was enough for the Hounds to kind of get sick loose on them.
Yeah, they've been ready to pounce. They didn't give him really anything in the first 2 weeks, so there's some built up anger there from outside the fan base, and then within the fan base. It's been so long since, we're back into the flow of things in football. I forgot what a Cowboys loss felt like and what that meant on the Twitter streets. And it's a very dark place. So it's been a tough, like you said, week, and it's only been 2 days.
Yeah, Brandon, you are generally the most positive person amongst us. I mean, you predicted 5,000 yards for Dak Prescott. You predicted the team to win like 15 games. There is no sky falling in your world. But it was an unsettling loss. To Tony's point, I mean, it had been a very long time since we had to reckon with this reality. And so there is a sense of like, hey, it's the first one. I mean, maybe everybody's kind of getting warmed up to this whole experience.
Yeah. As you mentioned, I'm very much a very positive Cowboys fan. Even with 7-8 minutes left in the game, I'm looking at Cowboys Twitter and everybody's like, this game's over. And then it's like Rico makes a play, goes across 7 people. I'm like, all right, we still got a chance here. My wife looks at me and she's like, you're nuts. But I've seen the Cowboys do these things before. I remember a particular Giants game where Jason Witten, made a catch at the end of the game where they had no business winning that game. So to me, the game's not over until the whistle is blown. It hits 0. So I was, and unfortunately, the Cardinals are not known as a really good team. And actually, in the last 15 years, the Cowboys have not done so well against the Cardinals, historically speaking. So unfortunately, the Cardinals have our number right now, which is obviously unfortunate. But to me, it's just a one loss. In these parts in Central New York, how we look at things is from a Syracuse basketball perspective is, one loss earlier in the season doesn't mean, oh no, you're not going to make the NCAA tournament. So for me, get the bad losses out of the way before the real fun really starts in December. And for me, I don't, even if you lose 1 or 2 games leading up to December, I'm not that worried about it. I'd rather get them out of the way now instead of going to the playoffs, losing a couple games, sputtering into the playoffs, and then the momentum's completely gone. So there's growth from this. Dan Quinn said a lot of great things on his press conference this week. He felt pretty good. And I trust Dan Quinn will right the ship. It was one of those weird games. Josh Dobbs threw for, the passing number is 189. That's not the number I really care about. It was 81% completion percentage is what I saw. And it was just, it was unfortunate, but it's one of those things. We have 17 games. I'm not worried about one game out of 17. I'm still standing pat. I think the Cowboys still 13 wins. I still think is very obtainable.
You mentioned that Jason Witten game. That was the 2015 season opener. That drive should always be known as the Lance Dunbar drive. I know that Jason Witten got the score, but Lance Dunbar did all the work, just to be very clear. A dive into the comments. Forever DC says they didn't look ready. Did we not have any scouting? No one knew the center was going to bounce his head up and down. In the flat says Dak didn't play bad, but when you make $40 million and looking for near $60 million on an extension, you need to be special more often. Yet again, he wasn't bad, but how about go win the game, Dak? $40 million is cheap. I mean, if you're upset about a quarterback making $40 million, I really think you need to get a grip on some perspective, but you did mention he wants to make $60 million. Obviously, that price tag is a little bit different. Let's see here. Courtney, Tony, I'm going to give you the points, but Courtney has said +5 points to Tony for his take yesterday on the First and 10 podcast. Red zone offense is a problem. Again, Tony, I'll give you the points, but I mean, everyone is kind of saying that. So, yeah. But nevertheless, you can have the points.
I appreciate her listening, but yeah, I think that's a pretty a wide view there that everybody agrees with.
Tony thinks the Cowboys are a good football team, everybody. But on a point note, you each earned 20 points with the introductory comment. So Tony, you're sitting at 25, Howman 20, Brandon 20. It is going to be a high scoring sort of night, kind of like a Syracuse basketball game in some respects. Casey Hammond, last thing before we get into our subject, impromptu question. You can only fix one. Are you fixing the red zone offense or the run defense? Only Howman gets to answer this. Howman.
All right. Well, I appreciate having the opportunity to be the only one who answers. And without really thinking too much about it, I'm going red zone offense because 1, you have to score touchdowns in order to win. And 2, if you fix the red zone offense and you're scoring a bunch of touchdowns, the other team isn't going to be running it that much anyway because they're going to have to throw to get back in the game, which was the case against both the Giants and the Jets. So I want to fix the red zone offense. And those are my only 2 choices.
I do want to say quickly, right before we dive in, I think it's hilarious. I know you were giving Dan Quinn some kudos, Brandon, but when the Cowboys lose, Mike McCarthy stinks. And I love Dan Quinn, to be very clear, but like the Cowboys got run all over, got passed all over by Josh Dobbs. And I mean, just complete crickets on Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is perfect, is infallible. It is never like he has such a sweet gig. I mean, like it is amazing. There is no fault that he is ever responsible for. So kudos to him. But Howman, you went red zone offense. Tonight's prompt for our roundtablers and for the audience is problems that we may have identified with the Cowboys as a result of their loss. And these can kind of stem throughout the first 3 games as a whole. I've asked each of our roundtablers to present 2 problems and then for them to agree or disagree with the prompts that are presented by their counterparts. So, Brandon, you are the reigning roundtable winner, and it worked out for you that Howman went with the red zone offense because one of your problems that you offered was the Cowboys' ability to stop the run. And also, disclaimer, if I misinterpreted y'all's points, please clarify when you were called upon. But that being said, Brandon, your issue, your problem, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, it starts up front of the defensive line. 222 rushing yards giving up against the Arizona Cardinals of all teams. It was a disaster. 7.4 yards a carry. I know some of those numbers can be inflated by Rondale Moore and Josh Dobbs. 40 plus yard per attempt, but still 7.4 yards given up. The defense just looked shaky on the front end. There was the alignments were off. Like I see the defensive tackle and the defensive end. It like there was so much gap in between. It was like you're begging the Cardinals to hit that hole. It's like you're going to leave it here. You're going to let a bus already go through this. Okay, well we'll go hit it. And last time I checked, James Conner is one of those dudes where he's not he's one of those downhill guys, and he's a power back, and he's going to hit the hole hard. And obviously, if he sees a hole that big, he's going to go for it pretty hard. And look here, 14 carries, just under 100 yards. That is not a good thing. And just by looking at the stats, the Cowboys have obviously they're 2-1 right now. We all know that. But this run defense has actually been it's no one's talking about it, but the defense right now is 25th in the league in rushing yards per game. So that includes a 28th for this past week. So looking at the stats, everybody's talked about how great this defense has. I certainly have. I love this defense. Looking at the pass numbers, the pass defense is one of the top in the league. I believe it's number 2 in the league for passing yardage per game given up. It's that part of it I'm not as concerned about just yet. I know the Trayvon Diggs situation. Unfortunately, he's not going to be with us for the rest of the season. Wish him well. Hope he gets back and ready for 2024. But to me, I made a point on the writer's block that you guys can go listen to on the entire Blog and the Boys podcast network this morning, where I want to see more Mozzie Smith. I want Osa to play as much as possible. And, Hankins he's a very serviceable. He does a good job. But to me, the point is you draft a guy in the first round, get him out there. If he's got 20% snap counts, and I think his highest on the season is like 20, 24, 25, and it's gotten lower and lower each week, I don't like that. Like, to me, when Neville Gallimore, yes, he's hustled. I've seen some of the highlights. A friend of ours, Brandon Laurie, co-host on the Writers Block with Howman and I, he sent me a great clip. He's like, yeah, I mean, he's an effort guy. But to me, you draft a guy like Mozzie Smith in the first round, put him out there, let him play. And this is going to help the linebackers because Mozzie Smith is such a strong, big dude. He can take on 2 guys, and that's going to leave the linebackers ready to attack the running backs. It all starts up front. Osa's doing a great job. I love what Osa's doing. He's going to be due for a big payday down the line. But, on the other end of it, on the other interior side, I want to see more Mozzie Smith. I think Mozzie Smith, with more snaps, you're going to unlock his potential. And you can't just let him sit on the bench. He needs to play. He's only going to get better with playing. And I'd rather have him in there more so than Hankins, just so we can get to see what we have in Mozzie Smith and not just sit on it for a year or 2.
Quickly, Brian, thank you for the super chat. Everybody follow Brian on TikTok at Talk Cowboys. It's week 1. Win was an overreaction week for the positive. This week is overreaction week for the bad. We aren't as good as week 1. We aren't as bad as week 3. Calm down and we will be better. Go Cowboys, Tony. there was a comment in response to my point about Dan Quinn from In the Flats that said Dan Quinn has built up more equity. If anyone has built up equity on the Cowboys, it is Micah Parsons. So I am in no way coming for him. But Micah has said, run right at me. And the Cardinals listened. And it did not work out well. So, I mean, everyone, what's the proverbialism? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. That's kind of what this felt like for the Cowboys on Sunday.
Yeah, it came out and it's perplexing. I don't want to kind of steal my own thunder for later on, but they just, for whatever reason, against an inferior opponent, they just didn't come out ready to play football. They just looked like there was a lot of mistakes. I mean, 13 penalties speaks for itself. Michael Parsons, I mean, eventually what we were going to see here is week 1 and week 2 were such outliers, right? Week 1, they were able to run the football a little bit on the Cowboys before things got off the tracks for them. Week 2, thank you to the Jets for not really sticking to it, even though they had Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook. Arizona didn't get, jump behind. They actually jumped out in front, which allowed them to stay on schedule and be able to stick to the plan. And the plan for the Cowboys last year into this season is run the football on them and you'll have success with the play action game. The Cowboys will kind of beat themselves and you see them kind of go out there and do these things. Michael Parsons isn't, absolved of that. My man, he had some penalties, he had some issues, and I think Dan Quinn or whoever alluded to it, like there might have been 3 guys on the defensive side of the ball that they said even played well or up to their standard. So it's really hard to look at this game, and like I said, I won't steal my own thunder later on, but you look at it and it's like, okay, nobody came to play, and you wonder why.
So you agree that this is a problem, right? Like, just to be clear, like you're not
Without
pushing
a doubt,
back.
yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Howman, this has remained a problem, right? Like this is like, Brandon mentioned Jonathan Hankins. The Cowboys traded for him last year because they needed help. They needed that big body along the middle, along the interior to kind of clog up the run. Didn't exactly do anything. When Leighton Vander Esch went down with an injury, it was like, oh man, well, you need Leighton Vander Esch. He's going to be the guy that kind of stops this. Like, when does it end? Like, what is the fix? Like, at what point? I mean, the 2 biggest threats to them in the NFC are both amazing at running the ball in the San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles. And so if you're getting gashed by the Cardinals, it doesn't necessarily incite positivity with regards to the future.
I mean, yeah, I do think it's frustrating to kind of keep having to talk about the run defense after they've tried all these fixes. But I agree that it was a huge problem against the Cardinals. I don't think it's like the biggest problem going forward, because what we kind of forget is against both the Giants and the Jets, they actually had a pretty good run defense. Granted, neither of those teams were running the ball a lot, but after the first 2 weeks, the Cowboys led the league in both run defense, DVOA, and they also led the league in EPA allowed per rush. These are not like volume metrics. These are per play statistics that look just at the efficiency of those runs that they were allowing. So they were doing well against the run against those 2 teams, even though they weren't running the ball a whole lot against them. Now, the Cardinals are a very different scheme. They run the ball a lot. They had the luxury of continuing to run the ball. But at the same time, like when I went back and watched the game afterwards, some of it just came down to bad run fits. There were a lot of times where the way that the defensive line lined up, they just left these huge holes open for them. And the Cardinals, they had a really simple time because they were basically just like, hey, look at that huge space. Just run there, pull our linemen over there, get in that spot, and you're going to have success. And that's what they did. And the defense did a little bit better against the run in the second half, and I think some of that was just Dan Quinn kind of tightened up some of those formations. But really, this comes down to more of a scheme situation of like shoring up the run fits a little bit. I don't know what they were thinking with the plan that they had, but again, I trust Quinn to be able to fix that and get that corrected going into next week, and then obviously the week after against the 49ers will be the real test of if they can actually stop the run against a team that's going to run the ball right up their mouth. So we'll see, but I'm not like hitting the panic button on the run defense just yet.
Okay, so not a clean sweep, so a failure on your behalf, Brandon. So no offense.
Hold on. I got to jump in really quick on this. So 25th out of 32 teams, and we're about 20% through the season. That to me, that's a little nerve-wracking, especially with the kind of games we got coming up. The Patriots, I think Bill Belichick's going to run hard against us, and obviously the Niners are right down the line here coming up. So I'm worried about it. 25th out of 32 against teams that know that we're struggling. They're going to hammer us in the middle. They need to do some changes in a hurry, or this is going to get nasty.
I'm sorry, I had to look at my phone and look at the weather app because there's thunder in the clouds that Tony Catalina was referring to a number of different times. Tony, I don't know which one of your own points you are referring to, but I'm just going to spin the wheel between the two and go with this one. This is your point, one of the two prompts that you sent. How this team handles inferior teams you believe to be a problem. We'll hear whether or not Brandon and or Howman agree with you, but state your case.
Yeah, there is no analytic number that's going to back my point up. It's just if you're a Cowboys fan and you understand the makeup of this team and just everything that embodies the Cowboys, like you knew that they're set up for one of these type of situations. What they did against the Arizona Cardinals is what they did against the Denver Broncos. And if you go down the history, they just do it consistently every year where there's one game that just doesn't make sense, right? Because I think Brian said it in the comments. They're not as good as they were week one, but I don't think they'll ever be as bad as they were this week, right? And it just doesn't make sense why a team who's organically tanking, who brought in Josh Dobbs to be the quarterback, and I know they've been gritty and tough and they played well against other teams, and I know the Cowboys are down 3 offensive linemen, but there's no rhyme or reason that they shouldn't have won this game. I think if they played it 10 times, the Cowboys win it 9 times. So it's just one of those things where I don't know why this team, they either feel themselves or they sleepwalk into a situation. They think they can get cute, and it becomes about everything but just doing the job. And it's just one of the most infuriating things because it just, you can never really tell why, but you can always tell that something like this might happen. And I knew the way, and this is just a feeling. This is, I've been a hopeless romantic for the Dallas Cowboys my whole life. So I could just feel by the way everybody was talking. I mean, we predict the games that Dave, Howman writes an article about it, and people are just so extremely positive. And even when Trayvon Diggs got hurt and Tyler Biadasz was dealing with stuff, people are saying, okay, now it's still going to be, it'll be 17-point win instead of a 24-point win, or it'll be 10. And I'm just like, this is just, it had the recipe to go exactly how it did. And I remember just looking at my wife going, here we go. And it was like the first drive. And I'm just like, this has it written all over it. So again, Howman's got the analytics. I just got the gut feeling, and I just know. And if you know, you know.
I don't think there are necessarily analytics to support or disprove this, but the Cowboys are one of the better teams against the spread in the Mike McCarthy era, which is, good teams win, great teams cover. And that's even as underdogs, which Mike McCarthy famously said the Cowboys are nobody's underdog, and kind of instilled that belief. Howman, I'll save my 2 cents on this until after each of you go, but I have a feeling that you're going to kick back against this a little bit.
Yes and no. I mean, I think on some level, this is just the way that it goes in the NFL. I mean, good teams occasionally lose to bad teams. Last year, same week of the season, the Chiefs lost to the Matt Ryan Colts, and that was not that had no impact on how their season actually unfolded. That had no impact on them getting there and winning the Super Bowl with a one-legged quarterback. Like the Chiefs are still the Chiefs. Like they're still a very good football team, very well coached, and it's the same thing with the Cowboys. They may not be as good as the Chiefs, but they're up there. I mean, they've won 12 games in each of the last 2 years. They're well coached. They're very talented. Part of me does get frustrated though that each of the last 3 years with Mike McCarthy, obviously the 2020 season kind of gets thrown out because of all the injuries they had and all of the things with the COVID pandemic and the new staff adjusting to it. But each of the last 3 years, they've had at least one game where they were just like heavy favorites, and then they come in, they get punched in the mouth, and they lose. And that is frustrating to see. It's frustrating because it's starting to become a bit of a trend. It's frustrating because specifically with the Cardinals, this is a team that they've struggled against, especially in that stadium. Everybody talks about like the turf, and in that Super Bowl last year, like the Chiefs and the Eagles both had problems with it. We saw, some of the Cowboys players in this game were they didn't have sure footing. They weren't as fast as they usually are. Some of it is just comes down to that. And I even wrote like in the week leading up how in their 5 games that they had played in the stadium, they were favored in all of them. They were 2-3 in those games. Now they're 2-4. Like things just go wrong in that stadium for them when they go out there and play. So, that's why I felt like this could be a trap game, even though it's the Cardinals. Everyone thinks they're tanking. They don't have a whole lot of talent. And it is frustrating to see that's exactly what happened. They fell into the trap. They got overconfident and quite literally, like they were too aggressive in the game. I mean, that Dobbs keeper, like Micah Parsons, just crashes down too hard If he was, just a little bit behind, he could have wrapped him up for a loss, and instead a 44-yard gain and, all the offsides penalties, people being over aggressive. So I'm not going to, kind of with the run defense, I'm not going to say like it's necessarily a problem, but it is a worrisome trend that's starting to form.
Brandon, Kevin notes in the comments, this stuff does happen. Who had Houston smoking Jacksonville? We also had a comment from Kevin that said, I doubt anyone had the Colts and Gardner Minshew beating Baltimore either. Weird stuff happens from time to time. Howman obviously cited the Chiefs falling to the Matt Ryan-led Colts last year, who were one of the worst teams in the NFL. So Tony's point notwithstanding, do you agree that this is a Cowboys problem, or just, it's hard to be perfect all the time?
No, it definitely is a problem. And to Kevin's point there, those are the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those are the two teams I was going to bring up. Week 14, Week 15 last year, the Cowboys snuck a win against the Texans, who obviously were tanking at that point of the game season to get it, to try to get better going forward. That game, they just barely won that game, and then they lost the Jacksonville Jaguars game, which I know they're on the come up, but they were an inferior team in my book last year. Obviously, they lost in overtime. In overtime, that was we remember that, we talked about it plenty. To me, it's a trend for the Cowboys. I feel like as a fan my entire life, I feel like the Cowboys could be they could have 10 wins going through like 8 games, for example, and a team that has 1 or 2 wins at that point, it's like, oh, here we go, here comes that trap game. It's just I have that feeling. It's just being a fan, and to me it's a gut thing, like Tony said. I go with my gut with these things, and I didn't feel as confident with the Arizona game. Like, it was knowing the stats in the last 15 years and everything that goes along with it. It to me, with the injuries, with that, it kind of was like, I'm not going to say I was like, oh my god, like this, it's not the end of the world, but it in a way, it didn't also surprise me, because the Cowboys have done this over the last few years. It's like I've seen games where they came out and they're flat. Now, I'm not going to say everything is on like the offensive line or the defensive line. It was a collective effort. You win as a team, you lose as a team. We all know that. But it definitely doesn't hurt. It definitely does hurt. I mean, when you lose 3 of your starting offensive linemen, 2 of them are going to be in the Hall of Fame someday, and then one, Tyler Biadasz, who is, to me, he's one of the most improved centers in the league. I think a lot of us would agree with that. And he's one of the better guys, and hopefully he's around Dallas for the long term. When you lose 3 guys like that, and you're putting 2 guys in for their first career start, you kind of, I hate to say, you almost feel bad for Dak.
I would offer, Tony, that I think this is true of every team in the NFL, every team in all sports. Like, find the team that is undefeated against the spread. You know what I mean? Like, maybe the 2016 Warriors, who lost in the finals, right? Like, I mean, like, it's just impossible. Like, it's just on a human level, it's impossible to be perfect all the time. I will say, I mean, like, I'm not saying that the Cowboys don't deserve fault for this loss. Brian, with a great point in the super chat section, thank you, Brian, says, I honestly think Mike McCarthy got caught with his pants down. I wouldn't go that far, but says, I think he rested offensive line for injuries. Discipline was non-existent and players just weren't prepared. I put that on Mike McCarthy. Thoughts? I think it's fair to put something like that on McCarthy. I agree with Brandon's point. Obviously, it's difficult to win under those circumstances, but if they're self-induced and you're that confident that you can overcome them, that's up to you. But I mean, equally, Tony, I mean, they win games they're not supposed to. Like the game that he said that line when they were nobody's underdog, they were like 6 or 7 point underdogs against the Rams with Cooper Rush. I mean, like, that's just life. Like, what goes up must come down. Like, gravity's 9.81 meters per second squared, like, so I don't think that's a Cowboys problem specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. Yeah, everyone loses games and they win. It's it's the part of the kind of the way the NFL's built. It's the how it is. But I will say, one more negative, and then I'll wrap it with a positive, is this team feels like they need a big moment to rise to the occasion, right? This wasn't the A-team broadcasters. This wasn't Greg Olsen. This wasn't Romo.
Yeah, it was, to your point, it literally wasn't. It was a kind of a quiet day for Fox. It was baked in there.
Right. So it's just like, yeah, you're getting, a B group, a C group, and it's against the Cardinals, and it's not the game, America's game of the week. So it's almost like you can bet. And I said this on the podcast, like, they're going to be up for the 49ers game. I don't know if they'll win, but they'll play well because there's eyes and there's something to that. And the kind of, like I said, about the positive side of it is how they handle these games. You see them go out and just curb stomp teams the next week. So I'm fairly confident we're going to see the best of the Cowboys next week against the Patriots. And that would just be more of the point where I'm frustrated, where every year I want to say this team is different. They're actually turning the corner. And a team like that, yeah, they're going to lose some close games. I don't want to get beat by 2 touchdowns by the Arizona Cardinals in a season they're trying to lose.
Chris Halling awarded Howman 10 points for his background. Chris, Howman has already been awarded points for his background. Plus, you can't come in and fudge the results and stuff the ballot box. Also, Chris, while we're at it, you can't comment that the Cowboys should trade for Kyle Pitts. We know that you feel very passionate about that. Everybody follow Dallas Cowboys Squad on Instagram, and Chris will tell you why that absolutely has to happen. Okay, my last 2 cents on this. Sorry, Tony. Is I put this in the same box as like when people are like, oh, this announcer hates the Cowboys. That's not true. Oh, Roger Goodell hates the Cowboys. That's not true. Oh, the Cowboys never get these calls. None of that is true. That is just your own human brain making human brain level decisions. And that's okay. Howman, you are up with your first one. Let's go with this one. People talking about Dak Prescott and his pick instead of the defense. Is your point. So it seems you agree that screw Dan Quinn's equity. Why are you talking about Dak Prescott and his interception? Dan Quinn was the one who fell apart in Arizona.
Yeah, I do think it was interesting, that comment about like Dan Quinn has more equity than Mike McCarthy. Like, which one of them has a Super Bowl ring? Like, McCarthy's been a head coach, gone to the Super Bowl and won. I know Dan Quinn
went. He went. Howman.
Yeah, no, he was there. Yeah, he was part of the most epic Super Bowl collapse in history. But no, I mean, Dan Quinn has done a tremendous job as the defensive coordinator. He took a very bad defense, turned them into an elite unit pretty much overnight. But like, he is not perfect. He had a bad game. The defense had a bad game. And I think the fact that so much of the discussion has been about Dak Prescott, and, we're talking about like, oh, he's, 40 million, wants 60 million. Like, you got to win games. And we're just kind of discounting the fact that he had 3 backups starting along the offensive line. And they're saying, well, if you're really that good of a quarterback, you're going to overcome that and you're going to lead your team to the win. Well, where was this energy in week 1, the very first game of the year, Pat Mahomes without Travis Kelce, and he loses to the Lions. And then the very next week he gets Kelce back, and granted the Chiefs win, but they only put up 17 points against the Jacksonville defense that just got 37 dropped on him by CJ Stroud and the Texans. So, like, he had a bad game against the Lions. He had a bad game with Kelce against the Jaguars, and everyone's kind of like, oh, Chiefs, they'll figure it out. Dak does it against the Cardinals, who through the first 2 weeks, they played fairly well relative to their expectations, and suddenly it's, oh, this is why Dak can't win games. This is why he's not, a top 5 quarterback. And a lot of it really hinged on that interception, too. It was like, I don't think a whole lot of people during the game were necessarily saying, Dak looks awful, but he threw that pick, and suddenly it's, oh, there's the Dak we know. There's all those interceptions. And just to that point too, like, before that play happened, first of all, there had been 5 straight run calls and burned almost 2 minutes off the clock. Very, very poor play calling from Mike McCarthy. I've been an advocate of his, but that was not similar to Dan Quinn calling a bad game. That was a really bad stretch from McCarthy. But at the point when they called that play, the Cowboys' win probability was at 12%. Obviously, it went down a lot more after the interception, but anyone who's saying like, oh, he cost them the game with that interception, like, they had a chance, yes, but they really didn't have a chance. The game was pretty much already lost then, because the defense gave up 28 points to Josh Dobbs, because they weren't really able to score in the red zone effectively, part of that influenced by their offensive line. And it's just so hard to actually say with some seriousness to it that, like, this was Dak Prescott's game, that he lost them, because there were so many other factors that went into it. And, it's just that adds a level of frustration alongside with the win, is now everybody's talking about Dak, even though all these other things went wrong.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, Brandon. And that's kind of the price that Dak Prescott pays, which is part of why he's paid the way he is. I mean, although granted it is a deal relative to the market, but I know that people see the $40 million number and they, that's a ridiculous number, whatever, blah, blah. But I think, I don't know at what point I realized, and I'm sure all of you realized this offseason, because this offseason was a real inflection point, I think, in the Dallas Cowboys quarterback polarization conversation. it's actually fundamentally impossible to have an objective conversation about Dak Prescott with somebody who doesn't root for the Cowboys, because they're going to be jaded, they're going to be swayed. Like, it is actually impossible. Like, it cannot happen because everybody has whatever biases or implied thoughts or implied assumptions about him. And to Howman's point, this was kind of the catalytic effect, right? Like, Dak Prescott throws an interception, and that's the headline for what was otherwise a really poor overall game from the team.
Yeah, 100%. It's, and unfortunately, for Dak, like you said, he is the face of the Cowboys. I mean, he's the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, of America's team. So yes, when he makes that bad throw, and yes, it was his first interception of the season thus far. He, through 3 games, he's thrown 1 pick.
But it was the most of course way to throw it, right? Like, it was like, I think we all were like, oh, of course, like, this is the way it happens, right?
Exactly. I'm sitting there looking at, watching the game, and I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be fun seeing all the great Cowboys haters out there. We're like, oh, there's Dak showing up in the clutch when he's done other clutch things in his career. To me, it's the talk about Dak Prescott, especially, yes, you mentioned the $40 million average salary. He's 11th in the league among quarterbacks, tied for 11th in annual salary, for a guy who is in my opinion, he's a top 10 quarterback. So to me, you're still getting value.
Yeah, if he's better than 11th, he's a value. Like, that's it. That's all the exactly. Conversation is. I mean,
and here's the other thing: the guy he's tied for 11th for. You ask any Giants fan, oh yeah, are you happy about Daniel Jones for $40 million? They're going to lie to your face, say yes. They don't. For $40 million, they can get Aaron Rodgers. I mean, obviously he's injured, but before the injury, his average was 37.5, and I think they would take his, almost 40-year-old self before the injury, before a younger Daniel Jones. To me, it's a joke, and yes, Dan Quinn does, he does have a little bit of that bank, so to speak, where he's got a lot of funds in the bank, literally and figuratively, where with the fans, we do give him a little bit more of an easy pass.
But it's a completely easy path. The dude walks on water. I mean, like, what are you talking about?
It's true.
Actually, while we're on the subject, does anybody remember who was the interim head coach when Mike McCarthy was on the COVID list in 2020 and they went to New Orleans and they barely won? It was Dan Quinn. Like, they almost did not win that game. And Dan Quinn was the interim head coach. But no, the dude, again, I really like Dan Quinn. So I hate that I have to, like, go to such a negative end of the spectrum to put, kind of provide balance in the force.
No, I agree. No, you're not wrong with that. It's 100% fact. We all love DQ. He's the best defensive coordinator in the league. Even defensive coordinators, coaches can have bad games. They can call bad games. So guess what? Dan Quinn, if he has one of these every so often, okay, you're not going to go and fire the guy. Like, he's still, to me, for my money, I would say he's the best DC in the league. That's just my opinion. But, to Howman's point, I do think it's on the defense more so, because we've already hit on it. They gave up the second most rushing yards by an NFL team this week. I'm just going to say this. The other team was the Broncos, which we know how that went, 70 points, all that, 350 yards on the ground. But the Cowboys gave up over 200 yards rushing, and they're 25th in the league in rushing. So the rush defense right now is not good. The pass defense is, I didn't think Josh Dobbs, really lit the world on fire. I mean, he 189 yards passing. Okay, I'll take that against any quarterback in the league, to be honest with you. It's under 200 yards. So to me, I'm okay with that, but it's more so the run defense. And again, Dak Prescott is not the problem here. Dak Prescott played well enough, and I've already hammered it down. He's missing 60% of his offensive line, and he's running for his life. He has to get the ball out so quick, because obviously, of course he's going to say, I trust the guys that are out there. But come on, he has a ticking clock in his head saying, okay, Zach's not here, Tyron Smith's not here, Biadasz is not here. Okay, I really got to make a quick read and get this out, because I don't think these guys can hold up in protection as long as the other guys. So to me, I think he did a hell of a job. He still passed for 200, almost 250 yards. He still had a touchdown. He completed over 62% of his passes. It's not on Dak. He made one bad read, and of course, it cost the Cowboys the game. But it's a collective effort. Everybody didn't do their part, maybe besides Brandon Aubrey and Michael Gallup and Pollard.
All right. So to get off further into the tangent very quickly, Casey says, I'm going to push back on the easy breaks we're giving Dan Quinn. He's earned the equity to go from the Nolan defense to where we've been the last 2 years, gives a lot of credence. Well, that also coincided with the drafting of Micah Parsons and Osa Odigizua, and the emergence of Trayvon Diggs, right? Like those, and the acquisition of Jaron Kearse. Also, if we're going to play this game, and Casey is really reasonable and objective, the Cowboys had literally not been a playoff team in back-to-back years in 15 years since Mike McCarthy did it. The Cowboys had not won double-digit games in back-to-back years in almost 20 years or 30 years, excuse me, until Mike McCarthy did it. The Cowboys could not win without their franchise quarterback under center until Mike McCarthy did it. So, like, again, that's fine and true, Casey. And again, I'm not coming for Casey here, but like, we like, oh, well, Dan Quinn was better than the worst Dallas Cowboys defense in the last 30 years. So he's got all this equity in the bank. Tony, we've gone a little bit long on this. So Howman's really raked in the points on this one. I don't know if you guys have been keeping track like I have. But I used to say, Tony, that understanding that Tony Romo was a really good quarterback was kind of like a password into a secret club. And James, I'll get this right here, Panagopoulos says Dak is becoming Romo. And then Helen chimed in and said Romo was way better than Dak. We've regressed this far. Tony, like, again, it's impossible to have this conversation. It really is.
Yeah, if you went back in time and looked at my tweets, like I'd be tweeting Romo is the litmus test of do you know ball or not? And now it's fast forward to 2023, and I'm saying the same thing about Dak Prescott. It's super frustrating, and sometimes if I can level with you, I wish I was a fan of any other team where my team loses and I can just be upset about that instead of going, oh my God, like here comes X, Y, and Z conversation because Dak had to try to force a ball in a 12% chance to win a game situation. So it's if you're the shortstop of the Yankees, you're the shooting guard of the Lakers, like it comes with the territory. It's not fair. It's not, and you got guys like Josh Allen, who's Oprah Winfrey with turnovers. Okay. So it's just really hard to.
Jalen Hurts had 2 picks on Monday
night.
I mean, they won, but like Dak threw 2 picks in games the Cowboys won last year and got killed for it.
Yeah, and then they go, Jalen, weren't you sick, right? Like you were sick before, you were sick. So that explains it, right? So no, but understanding, and I tweeted it out, and I couldn't believe the amount of like blowback I got on it. I said Dak isn't even in the top 10 reasons why we lost this game. Like everyone's gonna paint to like the nail in the coffin is the interception, but what about nothing else going correctly? What about guys getting hurt fully padded in pregame warmups? Like Tyron Smith couldn't even play. The guy was suited up for nothing. It looked like me in the stands. So it's just the Dak Prescott conversation is so frustrating because you want to have a normal conversation. We're guys that take time out of our day to talk and try to bring factual information. You try to leave the biases out. You try to have a real conversation. And then as soon as Dak Prescott gets thrown into it, it's like a grenade of nonsense. And it's just, you just don't, it's tough. Yeah, no, Dak Prescott isn't the reason we lost this football game. It got to a point where, you make the smart decisions and you make the easy throws, but then you get into these condensed areas where the game is, we're literally running 3, 4, 5 times under 4 minutes, and you got to make something happen. And he tries to find the one seam. Now, if it was the absolutely perfect ball, Brandon Cooks might have a chance at it, and it wasn't. And there were 3 guys there. And then you look around and you're paying the all 22, and there wasn't a soul alive open. So it's just, okay, yeah. He threw an interception. He's on pace for 6 of them on the year. If he gets 6 at the end of the year, I'm sure a lot of people will quiet down. But guess what? Probably not.
Okay. Well, there was clearly a lot of passion there. So, and Howman, I think, properly leads the way currently. Howman sitting on 62 points, Tony 51, Brandon 50. You each still have 1 problem left to present to the class. I'm just going to be straight up with you. I didn't think this would take this long. So we're going to have to be a little bit quicker here. Each of you, when you present your case, and then obviously the other 2 in responding to it. So, up to the 4th gear, please, gentlemen. So, Brandon, we'll go back to you. Offensive line depth. We've kind of hit on this throughout the course of this. Danny Phantom actually wrote an article last week that I think was inspired by our roundtable discussion, which was, hey, Chuma Edoga, TJ Bass, the Cowboys all of a sudden have this like proper offensive line depth. And I don't think that we're really upset with them. I think we're just upset that they're needed right now, right? That Chuma Edoga has had to play 2 different positions already so far this season, and we're only 3 games in. I think the problem, if you have one, is probably with Tyron Smith and Zach Martin and Tyler Biotish, because they're the dudes who had to miss time so early on.
Well, a week ago, I was the only one on this roundtable that sold the depth, so I'm going to take credit for calling that.
So you manifested and put it into the universe. Way to go.
Unfortunately, I think I did, but neither here nor there. Hopefully that this coming week it'll be a different story. But for me, it's obviously the 3 offensive linemen being out is a very rare situation. You don't see that happening all the time. But to me, it just Udoga just he doesn't look comfortable on the outside. I felt like the alignment of that line was incorrect. I felt like Tyler Smith. I know they're trying to make him keep the continuity. Let Tyron Smith when he plays play left tackle. Tyler plays left guard. I get that, but in this situation, if you're going to have to put a makeshift line together, I think Tyler Smith of the 5 you put out there is the clear best left tackle in my opinion. So I would have slid Udoga inside. That's just my opinion. And then I think TJ Bass, some of the numbers and metrics out there, I watched the game and I'll tell you this, TJ Bass looked pretty good in my opinion. I thought he did a stand-up job out there. The PFF world will say otherwise, but I watched the game and to me, I think TJ Bass, and it's not my TJ Bass blinders, obviously, because I am a big fan of his, but to me, it showed the lack of depth because, once you bring these guys in, it's like, okay, there's a huge drop off. I mean, obviously there's going to be a drop off. You have 2 Hall of Famers out, you have Tyler Biadasz out, but to me, and I proposed this on the writer's block that aired this morning, where I wanted to see another veteran come in. There's guys out there. One who actually played at Syracuse University. He was a guard and a tackle, Justin Pugh. And Howman rolled his eyes because, of course, I had to bring that in. But he's one. Roger Saffold, he's an older guy, but he was a back-to-back Pro Bowler who also played guard and tackle in the league. Like, to me, like in this situation, like if we're going to be down these many guys, it's even if we're down 1 or 2, and Tyron Smith gets injured more often than not these days, you should have a solid guy in place. And I think, I may be the only one on here that will say this, but I don't see it with Udoga. Like, I know a lot of people in the Jets land. My buddy covers the Jets, and he's told me before, I don't know why you guys got this guy. And I'm like, I agree. Like, I watched the kid play. I just, it's nothing personal. It's just, my evaluation of him is, at left tackle, no, I don't want him out there. It's just as simple as that. Bring somebody else in. Off the street, I would have liked to see Asim Richards in there over him. I would have rather seen him at left tackle than Udoga because I've seen flashes. I know Phantom loves him, and I trust Phantom's viewpoints on that. But to me, and I said it last week. We were going into the game with 6 guys like that. Before Hoffman. All
right, Brandon, we gotta move. We gotta move.
But the point is the depth is just not. It wasn't there for me, and the injury showed it. And, it makes me nervous when you're playing against some of these higher teams. Like the Cardinals are one of the worst teams in the league, and we got destroyed. If that was the Niners, I mean, Bosa would be in the backfield every time.
Tony, quickly, the Cowboys chose to not play Tyler Smith at left tackle. I honestly haven't seen a ton on this. Maybe I'm just missing it on social media. Chris Halling in our chat says it's mind-boggling. They chose to put Tyler on the inside without Tyron playing. Are you fine with that? Are you fine with the Cowboys just saying like, hey, Tyler's left guard, and unless Tyron's going to miss permanent time, we're keeping him there. We're just going to try to get through one game. Obviously, we had the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah, I think that is my ultimate, like the way I view it. I mean, the guy has been hurt. He hasn't had a chance to play. He's been, since training camp started, the left guard. He's been getting all the guard reps. And I know they did it to him last year where they, like the week before, they made him go and play left tackle. It's not an ideal situation. Udoga's the veteran presence. He's played, both spots. He's got a little longer in the tooth there. Doesn't mean that that's something we want. If this is Tyron Smith's going to be out, there's got to be a long-term solution. But I think they were trying to figure out a way to make them maximize or do the most they can with the offensive line. And to the offensive line depth, I don't think it's that big of a problem. I actually came out of it encouraged. I don't think any team is going to really do well when you get 3 of them out there, but I feel confident if we got to see 1 or maybe 2 out there. TJ Bass, Hoffman played decent. Like there's guys that showed some encouraging signs. Now, again, I don't want a whole, preseason lineup out there, but I think the depth helped their cause a little bit here. So to answer the Tyler Smith directly, for a short term, it's fine at left guard. It's not ideal, but it's fine.
Yeah, Howman, I mean, they got beat up, but I mean, they were down 3 starters, right? Like, and they were down their 3 best starters, all due respect to Terrence Steele. And even then, Terrence Steele had a false start in the first third down of the game, right? So like the one dude who's out there who's kind of like, not in his second year, Tony.
Which I really think was on Brock Hoffman and the cadence. I think They called on Steele,
Tony,
but everybody
did you not
moved.
understand that we were pressed for time? I mean, geez. Anyway, the penalty was called on Terrence Steele. That's the way it looks in the NFL GSIS logbook, and you just wasted 30 seconds. So those next points that anyone's going to give you, deducted from you, all right, automatically. So Howman, it was tough sledding. I mean, but we knew it was going to be, and they tried to make it work, and it just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, they made do with what they had, and I mean, we're talking about this like the offense came out there and like didn't score any points, like didn't do anything. Like they did pretty well. They actually had more total yards than the Cardinals did. Like that kind of got lost in everything. Like they were able to move the ball. Obviously, it's not what they wanted to do, but they were able to survive that within the structures of their scheme and with some of the West Coast principles. So like, obviously, yeah, you don't want to have to play another game with those three starters not in there, but I'm not really like, I'm not going and saying like, oh, we gotta go in and like sign a bunch of guys. Obviously, if someone's going to be out for a longer period of time, that's a different conversation. But I mean, I like what they saw with having to adjust and adapt on the fly. And I really don't think, knock on wood, that there's going to be a whole lot of other situations where kind of last second you find out you're without three guys in the same week.
Just a quick update. We have two problems left. Tony and Brandon sitting on 60 points. Howman, you're at 69. So there are two more opportunities to pick up points. Howman, we're going to stick with you. So your second and final problem of the evening, as I interpret it, were the lack of touches, as in you were upset that Deuce Vaughn and Cavante Turpin were not utilized on offense.
Yes. Very, very simple here. Neither of them got touches. Deuce Vaughn didn't even see the field on offense once. And at one point I was kind of scratching my head, like, is he inactive? And I'm like, I wrote the inactives article for the game, and I like knew I didn't write his name. And I was like, are you sure he's not inactive? Because he's not out there. And especially in this game where with the offensive line problems, one of the adjustments that they made is like Dak is getting the ball out real quick. He's not really taking deep shots. And there wasn't a whole lot open downfield anyway. And so you're dumping it off to guys real quick, throwing short of the sticks and hoping that they can pick up yards after the catch. Two of your most explosive players are Deuce Vaughn and Cavante Turpin. And Mike McCarthy's done a really good job in the last 2 weeks of getting especially Turpin involved, but also getting Vaughn some touches last week against the Jets. And they've both just shown that they have that extra gear. And I'm just like, why would you not, even if it's just quick dump offs, like get them on the field, because they have the explosiveness. They have what it takes to kind of build, gain some yards after the catch. And that's what you need in a game like this, where you're down three starters on the offensive line. And I just like, I'm legitimately wondering if like Deuce was injured, or if like Turpin was like, if he was sick or something. Like, how do you just, feature them in the previous 2 weeks, and then in a game where they would really fit, you just don't use them at all?
Tony, I wrote an article about this. It'll be out on Wednesday morning, and I tweeted it earlier on Tuesday. Tony Pollard has been used a lot, like a crazy amount in terms of recent Cowboys history. Through the first 3 games of the season, he has 62 carries and 12 receptions for a total of 74 touches. That is more total touches through the first 3 games of the season than Zeke Elliott had through the first 3 games of every season he played for the Cowboys, except for his rookie year. I know that was kind of a word salad, but I hope it made sense for all of you. I mean, so like he's on pace for this like heavy workload. And we spent the last 2 weeks like, oh, all of you made a horribly big deal out of Mike McCarthy wanting to run the ball. I don't know, man. Like not only is he trying to run the ball, he's trying to like wear out Tony Pollard in the process. When to Howman's point, Deuce Vaughn and Cavante Turpin, able-bodied players who are also available.
Yeah, I think the Tony Pollard numbers mixed with what we're saying about Turpin and Deuce is one of the low key bigger problems in my mind, because they don't really diversify the football at all. Like you look even last week, I think it was CeeDee Lamb had 11 receptions, but like nobody else really had much to speak of. And then you look at CeeDee Lamb almost looked checked out at times because he only had like 4 or 5 reception, 53 yards, but it was Michael Gallup's turn. And then the way I look at it, and I'm super frustrated by it, but it's my opinion on it, is they almost look at Deuce Vaughn and Cavante Turpin as like front runner pieces. Like, oh, we're up 30 or 20. Let's get cute. Let's go give Turpin a run around. Let's get Deuce out there and get the Deuce chance going. Like when the game's on the line, they're going to force feed Tony Pollard. They're going to try to jam the ball down CeeDee Lamb's throat. And they just don't really like, they have their guys. And where is Tolbert in the mix? Tolbert don't get the football either. It's just they have 2 or 3 guys. I don't know if it's a Dak issue, if it's a Mike McCarthy issue, a trust issue. You're right. When you force feed Tony Pollard and you don't give the other guys touches, it creates a problem.
Brandon, it does kind of feel, to Tony's point, like Deuce and Cavante are the onion strings on the steak, right? You know what I mean? It's like, hey, like, here's the piece of meat, and like this is the little garnish. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get the little, you get chives or something to kind of dress it up. Like it, dude. I mean, they're like, those are, my son eats those. He likes those as snacks. You know what I mean? Like give us that all the time. Like we don't need it just as a garnish on top.
No, I mean that's a fair point, but I would say this: they're in the game less than 20% of the time, in the first 2 weeks. So it's, they're not going to be focal points in the offense. I think we all can agree with that. Are they the most explosive players on the team? Absolutely, no questions asked. I think it's just, to me, it's a 1 week situation. I felt like McCarthy was going at a more of a conservative. I know we've said that millions of times. I felt like in the last few weeks, a conservative approach considering the old line issues. And I felt like he didn't want to drop some crazy play with reverses and things like that, where it could potentially just get blown up in their face and set them back behind the chains. I think that's kind of my thinking. Yes, could they have thrown maybe a quick little receiver screen to Turpin, or a quick little, maybe a Texas route for Deuce? Sure. But I didn't mind. I didn't mind the fact that they were going more downhill. I think it fit considering the 5 offensive linemen you had in there. I was okay with it. I felt Hunter Lepke, I think he played pretty well. There were some good blocks in there. He was utilized a little bit, so I enjoyed seeing that. But the guy that I want to see more, like, I know you guys, you're talking about Turpin, you're talking about Vaughn. How about more Rico? Rico carried the ball. Let's see, he carried the ball 4 times. And he averaged, I mean, it's a smaller sample size because Tony Pollard ran for 23 times, but he averaged 5.3 yards a carry. And like, to me, he had a lot of juice out there. I mentioned earlier in the show, he did like, not a Barry Sanders-esque, but the point is, he went around like 7 guys at once. And like, it was like he put his foot in the ground and just went the other way. Like, Rico Dowdle, I know Tony's a Rico Dowdle guy. I know he's been ringing that bell all offseason, so I give Tony some credit for that one. But Rico Dowdle is, to me, he needs to get more touches. I want him to be the red zone back that Zeke was. I think he's our power guy, but I also like the fact that McCarthy ran the ball, right up the middle. Like, it wasn't like these flashy little sweeps and off tackles. It was right in your face. It was effective. They ran the ball. It was for 5.6 yards a carry. And, I know Howman mentioned it earlier, like that last, few minutes of the game, it was like 5 straight rushes. That part I didn't like so much, because that's why the Cowboys have a very bad red zone percentage right now. They're near the bottom of the league. I think they're in the late 20s right now. But, overall, I like the fact that they used Tony Pollard. They did that. But to me, it's more Rico Dowdle for me. Like, I think you don't want to wear Tony Pollard out. I get he's on the franchise tag. You can run him into the ground per se, like the Raiders have done Josh Jacobs. I get that. But at the same time, I think a guy like Rico Dowdle should be getting some more love and more touches, and I feel like he could help save a little bit of that wear and tear for Tony Pollard when we're going to need him in December and in January.
ESPN's Todd Archer tweeted after the Rico touchdown that it was the first Cowboys touchdown off of a screen pass. This was according to ESPN Stats and Information since 2019, which is basically the entire Kellen Moore era as offensive coordinator. But to the point at hand, don't even use Tony Pollard on the screens. Like, use Rico Dowdle, use Deuce Vaughn, use Cavante Turpin. Like, throw the ball to them in the backfield. Like, that, get the ball in their hands, get them in space, give them opportunities to break tackles. Speaking of Tony and utilization, our Tony is about to land the plane here. The final problem, Tony, this is how I wrote it. The way Cowboys Nation handles adversity. So we'll see if Howman and Brandon agree with your point, but go ahead, take us home.
Yeah, this probably won't win me any favors within the fan base, but I think, as our arch nemesis once said, we got to relax. RELAX. Okay, like, we just got too much. Like, Cowboys fans get too excited. The highs are way too high, the lows are way too low. Like, yes, this is a tough loss, but like, let's not make it bigger than it has to be. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, I forgot what a loss felt like and how like panicky it gets around here. We need to relax. Okay, it's a tough loss. Nobody played well, but everything that we thought good about this team in the first 2 weeks doesn't all of a sudden not become true. And then you got Chris Holland and the rest of Cowboys Nation saying we need to trade for Kyle Pitts and we need to make
Chris taking us straight in the comments. Jeez.
everybody loses their mind. It's almost like that Joker line. You know what I mean? Like it just everyone's losing their mind.
Tony, Chris agreed with you. You just took a shot at
So yeah, that's pretty funny actually. But I will say, so the Cowboys nation as a whole, we just need to learn how to handle adversity. Like are we all in agreement here? Maybe outside of Brandon that we weren't going undefeated. Like, you know, like we were gonna lose like we were gonna lose a football game here, right? It was gonna happen. None of us really thought it was gonna be against Arizona, but that doesn't mean that everything changes. This is still a quality football team. This is a team that is flawed, obviously, but this is a team that is still in the upper echelon. I know RJ, you had them at 6. I feel like that's fair after everything we've seen, but you know, this is a top 5 football team when they got everything going around. But I think we all as a fan base need to relax. We need to learn when, you know, to fight the fight, and this isn't worth the fight.
Just quickly, I had the Cowboys at 6 in my power rankings at blogontheboys.com, and we also curate where outlets across the internet have the Cowboys. And my good friend Jimmy, he asked me yesterday on Monday, he was like, hey, like, you know, what do you think are going to have the Cowboys, whatever. And I was, you know, kind of talking about it. He's like, well, what do you think is the lowest that they're going to be like with all the outlets you pull? I was like, I guarantee you someone's going to have them like near 10. Like everyone's going to kind of be around the same place, but somebody's going to be the one to like drop them way too low. No strays intended at USA Today, but they dropped the Cowboys all the way to 9. I mean, literally everybody else had the Cowboys at 6 that we pull at BTB. But Brandon, there is always like the one person who's got to like, oh, I got to do the hard Cowboys take. You know what I mean?
Of course. I mean, look at all the networks. I'm not going to give them any credit because y'all know who they are. Look at Twitter. I mean, Cowboys Nation will attack them on Twitter because of their poor takes on different shows. Again, I'm not giving them credit. I'm not going to say who they are, but y'all know who it is. And I actually said on Twitter, RELAX in one of my tweets during the game. So Tony, you know, that was kind of one of my things. I had to pull a little Aaron Rodgers out because, you know, I do get fired up during the game. I'm a very passionate fan. If you ever come to a game with me, you know, I'm going to be very loud. I'm going to be obnoxious, and I'm going to have a good time. But at the same time, you know, I simmer down. Like I realize, okay, there's 17 games in the season. You lose one, big deal. I still have the Cowboys winning 13 out of 17. That's 13-4. I am completely okay with it. I'm the glass half full guy. So, you know, at Cowboys Nation as a whole, yes, it's like when the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl, like they burned their city. Like Cowboys Twitter was like getting like torched. It was like, I'm like, okay, the sky is not falling. Dak Prescott is still an elite quarterback. Dan Quinn is still a good defensive coordinator. Let's all relax.
No words from Mike McCarthy. Only Dan Quinn, right?
Well, okay, Mike McCarthy.
We have to protect Dan Quinn. Nobody can even think about anything negative related to Dan Quinn. No, but don't allow it in your brains. Protect him.
I love Dan Quinn, but no, Mike McCarthy.
Everybody is so soft with defense. No pun intended for Dan Quinn. It's embarrassing.
Well, the run defense is soft, so he needs to work on that.
Okay, Howman, final points on this subject. Do you agree with Tony, who's basically called out every Cowboys fan for being too dramatic?
Well, first, I just want to cover my bases. One, I'm not going to quote the quarterback who shall not be named. And I'm also just going to preemptively say, Chris Halling, great guy, makes great points. Love him to death. But no, I am going to stand up for Cowboys Nation a bit because, like, this is a fan base. Like, we should be so lucky that the fan base is this passionate that when the Cowboys lose to a clearly inferior team, it just ruins their whole day. It ruins their whole week. Like, we should be lucky that they're that passionate about this team. Like I said at the beginning, my fiance is a Bears fan. She wakes up every Sunday and is like, who are we losing to this week? Like, why even watch the game? There's not really much point to it. Thank you, Chris. I mean, I have another Bears fan who, like, last week before they even lost to the Chiefs, he was already doing mock drafts. And I was like, buddy, it's week 2. Like, that's just the difference. Like, the Cowboys fan base they wake up every single day thinking Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl this year. If they don't get to the Super Bowl, like, it's not good enough. And that's the standard. And there's a reason that's the standard. So I don't really have a problem with them being, like, really upset, really, like, emotionally invested and being really angry when they lose, especially when it's to a team like the Cardinals where they were favored by 12.5 points. There's no way, even with all the injuries, there's no way they should have lost this game. Shouldn't have let it get away from them. Like, they have a right to be upset. Obviously I'll take some issue, especially like when they're saying like, oh, Dak Prescott, like we need to get rid of him or saying things like that. But, for me, like, as a writer, like, I have to, divorce some of that emotion and be a little bit more objective. But like for me as a fan, at the same time, like when they're losing, like I'm right there with you. I'm emotional. I'm upset. I'm not happy. Then I have to take the fan hat off. And like I get it, Cowboys Nation. I understand.
That was really kind of beautiful and sweet, Howman. So that was kind of a negative point. No offense, Tony, but you know what I mean. Like, but you kind of made it really wholesome. Thank you to Jim in the chat, Eagles fan Jim, who's very nice and hangs out here. And corrupts their own algorithm, by the way, hanging out here. So really nice job from Jim. And thank you for the super chat. Says Jim says, go Astros. Good roundtable, fellows. The Astros in a tight race of their own for the AL West, which is really dramatic for me.
Whatever.
Look, I know you guys all. Howman, we got to get you to pick a baseball team. Well, how about the Diamondbacks? There you go. Congratulations. Anyway, I think that there is some truth to everything that all of you said. Tony, I agree with you that sometimes like the sky can be falling pretty loudly when it's really not that bad. But Howman, you're right. It's not just that they lost the game; it's that they lost to a radically inferior opponent. And I find it amazing, by the way, that even though that's true and the way that they lost, that people still won't come for Dan Quinn. Like he is that Teflon that like people are so blinded by the love for the non-Mike McCarthy coach that they can hype up, Tony, that they are just like, nope, nothing wrong with Dan Quinn. It's Dak and the interception. It's McCarthy and he wasn't aggressive enough. And it was too much Tony Pollard. Like they will not say it. There are some people who just refuse.
You said it earlier and I have to repeat it. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Like they don't like Mike McCarthy. They don't like Dak Prescott. They always like the next guy. They always like the backup quarterback. It just comes with the territory. So until Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott win a Super Bowl in a Cowboys uniform, everyone's going to have love. There's going to be a faction for the number 2 guys. You don't, what they say? Oh, you didn't see Sopranos, but you don't know what it takes to be number 1. You don't know.
Back to Jim here in the chat. Again, Eagles fan says, yeah, it was all Frank Reich, the Eagles offensive coordinator when they won the Super Bowl. Look how that turned out. LOL. Yeah. Everybody would totally prefer Frank Reich to Doug Peterson right now. Tony, you said what I said, that heavy is the head that wears the crown. We have to crown a winner here tonight. The final point total, super close race. Third place goes to Tony with 86 points. Second to Brandon's with 87. First place, throwing up the X, CD Lambing it all the way through. It is the one and only David Howman. Congratulations, Howman, on the roundtable win, the final one of the month of September. Way to go. Woo! Accepted speech.
You know, it's exciting to win, go out on a win with the last one in September, because now it's time for October, and y'all know that is my month. So I'm going to enjoy this win. I'm going to celebrate the only way I know how, which is with some pumpkin. And by the way, I saved it until after the decision was made because I do have a baseball team, and it is the first place Rangers. But I knew if I admitted to that, you know, maybe some of that tweaked a little bit. So
that's how you play the game, people. That pisses me off, but I respect the game. So well done, well said. And I know, Howman, that you're down bad because you wish like crazy that somebody from your favorite team was dating Taylor Swift so that you had a reason to create all this sort of content related to her and around her music and things like that. So there is a Howman out there who covers the Kansas City Chiefs that is in Nirvana right now. So wow. Brandon, any final words?
Great job, Howman. I just want to point out the writer's block is on a winning streak right now, two straight. So good deal.
Sounds like a shot at 1st and 10, Tony.
I need
Tony,
Aiden on here. Yeah.
Do you feel bad for the stray that you lobbed at Chris Holland?
Nah, I shoot straight. That was straight at him. It wasn't a stray. That was right at him.
Wow. I tried to defend your honor, Chris. Don't let it ever be said that I didn't. Okay, let's leave. And as we do, Tony Catalina, in the spirit of baseball, please sing "Take Me Out to the Ballgame."
Take me out to the.
Okay, do the last Do the last verse. I don't care if they ever come back, and then we'll just take us home from there.
Root for the home team. That's all you got. I don't even know the rest of the words.